everybody! Welcome to this series, the first episode of my October Halloween Fear series. So while everyone's popping on, shoot me a little hello. Let me know where you're from. And I want to talk today about fear. And ultimately, I'm always talking about fear, right? Because the kind of people that I work with, the women that I work with, are people who are very aware where their fears come up, how their fears limit them, and we're always figuring out how they can surmount those fears. And I thought, this seems like the appropriate time of year to do a little fear series because it's October, which is Halloween month. So I want to know, drop me in the comments, do you love Halloween? There are some people who are Halloween fanatics, right? They love everything about Halloween. They get all decorated. Their October 1st is like all Halloween month. Now, I love Halloween. But I am not all about the Halloween. And I'll tell you this. Hey, Brittany. Hey, Carol. I'm so glad that you're here. So here's why I love Halloween. Well, number one is I love celebrations. Any reason that we can get together and have a theme, have something going on. I know Brittany's with me on this one. And pumpkins and the weather's shifting, and I love all of that. But what I do not love is the scary part of it. Even my VA, she put together some of the graphics for this next series. So this is a 3-parter. So today and then the next 2 Thursdays. But the first graphics she gave were like very Halloween-y, and they were too scary for me. I couldn't handle it because I don't choose those things. Like, I know the fears that we got to deal with in life. I'm not someone who likes to watch horror movies. So for all of you who are, have at it, have fun. But even if that's not you or if it is you, we all have to deal with fear. So the reason that I like to talk about fear is because fear is where the magic is. Like, fear is where the growth is, right? Like, we are biologically wired to feel fear. And I'm going to get into that biology in a little bit. But first, I want to tell you a story. So yesterday, I was hanging out with my daughter. We were rearranging my office, and she wanted to light some candles. So I thought, great, I got some matches. So lit some candles, and I lit a couple candles, and the match was getting to that place where it starts to burn your finger, and so I instinctively shook it so that it would go off, and the top piece, right, the little ember, flew off and it landed on my desk, or so I thought. And my desk is, not very flammable, and I could see it there. It was black, so I wasn't worried about it, and I turned my back, and then when I turned back around, I looked under the desk where there's carpet, and actually there was 2 embers. So one had landed on my desk and the other had flown up behind my desk and landed down on the carpet, and it had caught fire. And it was just a little fire, right? It wasn't big, but I saw it and I instantly sprang to action, right? There was no pausing, there was no thinking. It was like instant action, instant fight or flight. Thankfully, there was a cup of water. I dumped it on the flame. It went out. After it was done, I still felt afraid. And I told my daughter, I feel fear. I felt a lot of fear right there. And she said, I feel fear, right? And how much of that is her just mimicking what I say? She's just about 4. And how much of that is actually her emotionally picking up on what I, what's feeling? Actually doesn't matter, right? Because we learn fear both ways, right? There's part of it that we're biologically wired for, and there's part of it that we absorb from those around us that we know and trust, and then there's part of it that we just hear and we learn. So the thing with fear that's so cool, right, when we think about it, is that fear is fundamentally based on an assumption, right? Because it is absolutely future focused. You can't be afraid about something that happened in the past. Maybe you can be afraid of that replicating in the future, right? But you're not going to have fear about something bad that happened. You're going to have grief or sadness or, pain, unresolved pain, anger maybe, but you're not going to have fear, right? So it's absolutely future focused. And it's about an assumption, about how something's going to play out. So not this week, but on the third episode of this, I'm going to talk about how do we differentiate between fear that's like that spidey sense, right? That like things aren't right, versus fear that just starts here with a thought, right? Of like, oh no, what if? And then we go down that rabbit hole. But I want to stay today with like the actual biology of the fear and really trying to unpack what it is when we're feeling fear. So if we think about how we've evolved, right? Like fear is so useful, right? If you take us back to the days of the cave people, right? When we were living in caves and figuring out fire and figuring out, how to make wheels and stuff like this, and a saber-toothed tiger jumped out at us, right? Like we need to act instantly, right? And our body knows how to do that. That's what happened to me yesterday. Like I acted, right? And so that part of your brain that knows how to do that, that knows how to like circumvents the prefrontal cortex, right? It's just like, boom, get into action, right? That part of your brain is like, we talk about like our lizard brain or like the limbic system, like it's so primal, right? Because that's how we stayed safe, right? By being afraid, we got to stay safe. And now we know, like looking at studies of moms, and so if you're a biological mom of a kid, the amygdala is actually like the fear center of the brain. It grows with every pregnancy, right? And so like we're wired that a mom is going to need to have like more fear sensors out there in the world because she needs to be more alert. She needs to make more assumptions about things that could be problematic so that she can keep her baby safe. Now, a cool little side note is that they've also realized that the same is true for adoptive parents. So anyone who takes on the care and the love of another, their amygdala grows too, right? So this idea of like, that we're adaptable, like all these things we're realizing in the world about how, how malleable, how plastic the brain is, right? That we can actually train it, and that's some of my favorite work that I do with my clients. So first I want to jump in. So we talked about the biology. Now I want to talk about the fears, right? Like how do we really analyze fears? And so some of you may know, I have my master's in psychology and the specific focus is on existential phenomenology. Now I know that's a mouthful, but here's how it applies to you. So we all have basic existential fears, right? We can call them existential anxieties, we can call them existential fears, we can call them existential dread, right? Whatever you call it, these are like the core things that we face as humans who are conscious, who know that we one day will die, right? And so the number one fear from an existentialist framework is a fear of death. Pretty logical, right? That keeps us really safe. I think of all the things that you haven't done in your life because you're afraid of dying, right? Like in many ways, that's the most foundational fear that we have. The second is a fear of isolation, right? And also, if we go back to those cave people days, being isolated meant death, right? Now we know that we can like build somewhat of a hermit life for ourselves and still be okay. I mean, this year is the prime example of that opportunity. But at the core level, that fear of isolation is hardwired in us. The third fear, which is pretty lofty and I love it a lot, is the fear of meaninglessness, right? This is also where I work with a lot of women, right? Like wanting to have a life of purpose, wanting to feel like what you do matters, that you matter, right? And the fourth fear is the trickiest one. This is a fear of freedom. Now, most people, when they hear this, they go, what? Like, especially Americans, right? I know Carol's up here from Canada, and I know her backstory. She's originally from England. However, right, like in America, we're all about freedom, right? We're like, freedom, that's the best thing, right? Or some of us are, I should say. So, but there's anxiety in that, right? Like, so if your life is entirely scripted, right? Someone else tells you everything that needs to happen. They tell you when you're going to wake up, what you're going to brush your teeth with, what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, when you're going to leave, all that stuff. Sure, maybe that life would suck, but you would not have any anxiety, right? Because you had no choice. So at its core, right, when you feel anxiety come up, often there's a choice, right? Often that anxiety is like, what do I do? Do I do this or do I do this, right? And this is where so many of us find ourselves. So many of us find ourselves where we are recognize that we're like overthinking something or we're stuck in our heads, right? And it's these fears, right? This fear of, if I say the wrong thing, is that going to upset someone? Or if I make this business venture, is it going to jeopardize my family's stability? How is my mom going to feel if I show up and I say this thing, right? Like all of those, there's a choice, right? So I want to offer you today the most holistic way for you to surmount your fears, right? So the first part of this is asking yourself why, right? So if something's coming up, ask yourself why, right? Like even like, what is that? Like, why is that there? One of the like lovely tricks that I've learned from my coaches that I now do with my clients is like, you ask yourself 10 whys, So why is this here? Okay, well, why that? Well, why that? Well, why that? If you go 10 whys deep, you really can get to the core of it. And oftentimes you'll get to one of these 4 like existential fears. Sometimes you don't have to go too far down that chain before you get there. Well, yeah, I'm afraid of dying, right? Like, okay, I'm afraid if I go for my dreams that they're not going to pan out and my family's not going to have enough food and eventually we'll die, right? Like, and it may seem a little bit silly, right, to put it in those terms, but your body doesn't know that that's silly. Your body is responding as if that is a very real threat. So once you ask yourself why, and you can get down to like, really, what fear is it? Like, what's really happening there? Having compassion for it, right? Like, oh, hello, look at you. You're trying to keep me safe. And one thing about our brain is that our brain is a scientist, right? Our brain knows how to experiment. And so you try one thing, right? And it works or it doesn't, right? And if it works, you'll probably try that same thing again and again and again, right? And so our brain knows that this is the way to stay safe. And anything we do that's outside of that is not gonna feel good, right? Because it's gonna make that fear come up. So your goal in this is to go toward the fear. Like we're so accustomed and we have so many opportunities to distract ourselves, right? TV or drinking or eating or our phones, online shopping, like whatever it is, right? We can distract ourselves with so many things that take us away because it's uncomfortable. And so my primary goal when I work with clients is to help them go to those places that maybe have felt uncomfortable before with like curiosity, with a little flashlight, right? Like, hello, what are you doing here? How are you trying to take care of me? What's going on? And then you can befriend it. Oh, hello, fear of isolation. Hello, fear of meaninglessness. I know you're trying to take care of me. But the thing is, this is what really matters. And I just have to follow my heart. Right? And so often when we get there, when we get to that little like fireside chat with our peers, we realize that we have choice, right? And if you really look at your choices, it's like this. I have anxiety before I do every single one of these lives, right? And anxiety is just code word for fear, right? So I have fear before I do every single one of these lives. Sure, it gets a little bit easier, but there's a point of choice, right? Where I don't have to do it, but I know that I want to do it, right? And if I just feel the fear, like the fear goes, oh, this is uncomfortable, like, pretend you forgot it, right? Cancel the event, something like that. But if I sit with those fears and I go, hello, fears, what's going on? One of them's going to say, stay safe, abort. What if you say the wrong thing? What if your people don't love you anymore? Oh no, I'm going to be alone, right? And what happens if I'm alone? I'm going to die. Like, oh, okay, of course you're afraid of that, right? But also, why do you want to do this? Well, I want to do it because I want to reach people, because I want to help, because I know that there are people out there, and I hope that they find this video, people who don't know what to do with those fears, people who say, I'm just stuck in my head, right? I just can't get past this overthinking. I know that my fears keep me small, but I'm in my own way. What do I do with that, right? And when you turn to those fears, that's an opportunity to listen and even trust, right? Not only are you trusting this calling of yours that's from your heart, that is your connection to the big divine, right? The universe. Like, there's a reason that you're built the way that you are. There's a reason that you have the feelings and the desires that you have in your heart, right? So following that, trusting that. And then you get to trust your biology too. So we have research now that tells us that if you have an emotional response and you turn toward it and you let it do its thing, it'll last 90 seconds. Right? So often we think, the fear, it's just going to be there forever. And we think it's going to be there forever because we're never really turning to it. We're just distracting. In the meantime, it's here, just like nibbling. Hey, I need attention. But when you give it that attention, oh, there you are. It's like, thanks for listening. That's what I needed. So I'm going to wrap up today. And I want you to join me. Next week, we're going to talk about the top 3 fears that women face. And the week after that, we're really going to get into like our body wisdom and how do you differentiate between like what's a real like spidey sense fear and what's a fear that starts in your brain, right? And then trickles down. So shoot me any questions. Let me know how this resonates for you. Sending love to you all and hoping that you only have the kind of fear that's a welcome fear this month of October, and for anything that feels unwelcome, an invitation to go a little bit deeper. Okay, bye now.